Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, keep your microphones off. Then, if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming Professor Stephen. Stephen is a professor of accounting and auditing in the Smith School of Business, Queen's University in Canada. Stephen is currently editor at the Accounting Review. Stephen's research on the balance scorecard, auditing, auditors, client management, mitigations, and field research methods, aided in establishing this accounting and auditing research areas. Stephen has published in top-ranking journals such as the Accounting Review, Accounting Organization and Society, Contemporary Accounting Research, Auditing, a Journal of Practice and Theory, Behavior Research in Accounting, Journal of Management Accounting Research, Journal of Business Ethics, and Journal of Accounting Research. Stephen graduated with a PhD from the University of Michigan. Now we will start our seminar with Professor Stephen.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And this is a really neat venture that you're doing. While I've been unable to attend any of your previous workshops, I've been reading the list of attendees and speakers, and I think you are doing an excellent job. And so I just wanted to congratulate you on a very innovative cross-disciplinary set of workshops that have a wide variety of speakers from various countries with various interests in them. So that's a good job for you. And as my North American friends who are attending today know, I don't give praise unless it's really due. And so well done. Let me see if I can get up the video, or not the video, the PowerPoint presentation. And allegedly right now, what you should be seeing is a copy of the slide that Mohammed put together, which I thought was really nice. Is that what we're seeing now? We are actually seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Excellent. I always like to make certain that we're on the same page. As Mohammed said, I'm happy to take questions throughout the presentation. For those of you new to this world, the participant button at the bottom of your screen has a hand raise that's either sign or hand in it. And you just do that, and hopefully I'll actually recognize the fact that you raised your hand and that I will answer your question. Let's see if we can get this going. The motivation for this line of reasoning and research comes from some observations I've been making as a journal editor for the last 30 years, where it's become increasingly obvious to me that there's a lot of goodwill on both the sides of the academics and policymakers towards each other, but that goodwill has not been translated into actual action. And the action I mean is to routinely transfer knowledge from the academic sector to the policymakers and the regulators to inform their standard setting. This does not mean, and I am not trying to say, that such transfer never occurs. That would be wrong. But the point of my research and the point of what I'm trying to get across is we have not come to a time yet where it is routine and it does not depend on the extraordinary motivation of a single standard setter or a single group of academics to actually put that transfer into effect. And so this has led me to consider some of the reasons as to why. And one of the biggest things on the academic side, I think, has been the focus of the individual journal article as the primary means of communication. And the problem is that it mixes up the knowledge production function, which is done very well through individual academic articles that are targeted at other academics, and the knowledge transmission to users function, which is not interested in the minute detail of how the knowledge has been created, which is what is emphasized in the individual article. And indeed, what we need to realize is that in other disciplines where there has been relatively more successful translation of academic research to practice, that a very different unit of knowledge transfer has been used, and that is known as a research synthesis. The only problem that we could see with this when we came to this conclusion is that the only experience that we've had with systematic use of research syntheses was done in a public company accounting oversight board, the US regulator / standard setter in auditing, and the American Accounting Association's audit section, who put together a literature synthesis project that went on for almost a decade. And it was discontinued without any real evaluation as to its effectiveness. From what I can tell, it was mainly due to convenience of the parties involved in change in personnel at the PCAOB. So in our research program, what we did is we first put together a conceptual paper about the barriers to transferring auditing research. Now, for my accounting friends, my financial accounting friends, I've talked a lot to Christian Lutz, the editor at the Journal of Accounting Research, and he tells me that he is working very hard on this particular issue with financial accounting standard setters. But in our discussions about this problem, there is a history in the financial accounting community that adds a level of complexity to advocating for this approach in the financial accounting community. And in particular, the financial accountants for many years let the efficient markets hypotheses get in the way of believing they had anything to contribute to ex ante standard setting, and that at the very best they could do was maybe some ex post evaluation of the effectiveness of the standard. And so given that 40-year history where many financial accounting academics were basically telling standard setters, we have very little to contribute to your deliberation, he and I basically split the world up. He's working on the problem within the confines of the financial accounting community. And I decided that my research team would focus in on the audit side, although there's a tremendous amount of transfer between the two at the conceptual level. Nonetheless, that there's too many additional problems involved at the level of the financial accounting side for me to be aware of and me to address them intelligently with my research group. And so this is why the examples that we come up with are all in auditing. And for my management accounting friends, the same issue arises. But once again, I talked with the folks at SEMA about this, And they're aware of this. They're not buying into yet the fact that this can be done. Hopefully, this sort of evidence will help persuade them that there is a way forward that moves the unit of knowledge transfer to practice from that of being the individual academic article towards being a synthesis of that work. And so this leads to the paper, the underlying paper that I'm presenting today, which is to do a proof of concept. This is part of what one would describe as a design science approach. And we are intending on answering this question with the research. And hence the title of the talk today, which is Can Accounting Academic Consistently Influence Practice? And at various levels of abstraction right down to can a research synthesis developed according to evidence of best practices be used to transfer audit research knowledge to policymakers. In summary of the findings, accountants don't like to write mystery novels and wait until the end to find what the plot point was all about. We demonstrate through a simulation that the research synthesis approach can address a real world audit standard setting issue where that was evidence that was available at the time the issue came up, and that the standard setters that took part in our synthesis project, and we had real standard setters that all recently retired, came up with the following conclusions about the prototype that we developed. Now we're talking about prototypes, and it's a language that is not much known in accounting research other than those who do accounting information systems research, where design science is quite well known. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes describing the research approach, because if you're going to buy into my conclusion, you have to buy into the fact that we've done a rigorous piece of research to support what we're doing. So design science, as I understand it, is learning through the act of building. And the goal is to develop a solution to a real world problem of interest. And management theorists who were relatively late in the process of getting involved in this say that it could be an aid in solving the old and thorny problem of integrating management theory into practice. And relevant input for evidence-based management can be produced by design science and design science-oriented research synthesis. So if you want to appeal to experts, there are some experts that are suggesting this is an effective approach. There are several design science process models. Being an accountant, I took the simplest linear form of the model. There are other forms of design science research models that are more elaborate. But as an accounting researcher, I wanted to deal with something that was simple and straightforward. And it's basically a 5-step model that talks about awareness, how to improve, develop a prototype, a tentative design to implement the improvement, evaluate the quality of that prototype, and lead to a conclusion. Now, while this is positivist research, unlike most positivist research, the combination of, oops, there we go. I knew I'd do that sooner or later. I always do this when I teach. is the development of the prototype and the evaluation are intimately connected. And this is often a bit of surprise for those who come from a hypothesis testing tradition, but this is a form of positivist research. There is a lot written about this in other disciplines. And so we're just taking the relying on the underlying construct. So just to reiterate the basic problem, a long history of research from all over the world, and I've just mentioned a handful of the folks that have been involved in calling for accounting research knowledge to be focused in on a greater practical implication, the evidence-informed call, especially by the international accounting standards people, and the fact that the IASB has twice as many academics on it as the FASB does may help there, who knows. And the individual journal article is a problematic idea for transferring knowledge directly. The design science approach says you got to get your hands dirty, and you got to get your hands dirty quickly. And you start by taking a specific problem and showing that the suggestion for improvement to dealing with that problem actually works for a particular instance. And so what we focused in on is a little statement that was documented in the IAASB minutes when they were debating one of the standards that has proved to be particularly troubling, the group audit standard. And the IAASB member said, and we'll get into the details of this, it's not clear why one approach is considered better than another. And does the one approach render a better outcome? So this came directly out of the minutes. Of course, the question was never answered for the sake of the board member. But the group audit standard revision has been going on now since the late 1990s. At the time that we contemplated doing this research, it was the prototypical normal standard development process at the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. At that point in time, the IAASB was doing its Clarity project, where it was updating its entire corpus of standards in search of recognition by securities regulators around the world. So we couldn't really deal with that project in this particular paradigm because it involved rewriting an entire set of auditing standards. This was the main project that was going on that is more typical of a standard setting process. And at that point in time, back in the early 2000s, when the particular historical incident that we're looking at took place, it focused on the group auditor's responsibilities when they do not audit all of the material subsidiaries of a client, and they have to rely on a component auditor. And this became known as the sole versus divided responsibility debate. And the sole responsibility debate side was that the group auditor would take a much more active role with a much higher level involvement with the component auditor. And then the group auditor would be the sole person named in the audit of the financial statement. In a divided responsibility audit, the group auditor had a much lower standards required involvement with the component auditor and next to no involvement in the actual audit of the component itself, leading to an auditor's report where the group auditor explicitly acknowledged the existence of the component auditor in the consolidated financial statement opinion. And there's a wide variety of reasons why this particular issue arose. Many attributed strictly to the United States, that is far from being completely accurate, in that there are other countries that endorse the divided responsibility approach. So the initial revision to the group audit standard took place in over the period 2000 to 2007. Uh, hello. Nope. Okay. And three exposure drafts. And the interesting thing is that the particular issue that we're going to examine actually set the process back by 18 months. And so if one wants to consider real consequences, be they economic or be they otherwise, having something that might have been resolvable with input from research, or at least that would have recast the problem, might have saved the standard setter 18 months at the time of the actual process that was going through. And this was a result of a almost routine decision by the board that the division of responsibility provision should be retained. There were some questions being asked by people. The consultative advisory group had a European Union representative who made a very clear statement about the group auditor needs to take sole responsibility. But the IAASB had three chances at least to back down on its tentative decision, and each time decided to continue with that decision. And then along came the folks with the big stick, the IOSCO, the International Organizations of Securities Commission, and their endorsement was considered absolutely vital to the IAASB's project of becoming the de facto audit standard setter in the world outside the USA with its PCAOB. And IOSCO says, hey guys, we don't agree that this is something that can be set aside so quickly, and it would be disappointed if the IAASB provided for both alternatives. Fortunately, the IAASB had already had three chances to say, we're going to withdraw this approach. They didn't. And indeed, at the last meeting before they issued the exposure draft, this is where the question that we then focused in on was made by a board member. It is not clear why one approach, the divided versus sole, is better than another. Does one approach render a better outcome? The exposure draft that was released basically came in after the responses from constituents as being what we would call dead on arrival, DOA. 90% of the constituents commented on it, and at best be giving it the most interpretive Donald Trump type of interpretation of the support. There were 15% of the respondents that actually agreed with the board's initial position that the approach should continue. So it was back to the drawing board for the IAASB on this particular standard. So what we did is we first looked carefully through all the meeting files, the briefing documents, the transcripts and audio calls that were all made available publicly by the IAASB. And let me tell you, compared to the PCAOB, the IAASB is an unbelievably transparent organization that makes it very easy for researchers to get in behind the standard development process and understand what's going on. The interesting thing when we analyzed what evidence that was used in reaching the decision that they arrived at and then they stuck with and through all of 2003 was there was one lonely member who called for academic evidence. There was no academic evidence actually brought up of any form during the deliberations on the development of this particular standard. So a little bit more theory that shows how we then guide the work. So you start out by creating a new product in response to a problem. You bring together a community of users to help develop the solution. And then you actually make the product, warts and all, and see how does it work? Would it have been useful? Does it look like it might be useful in the future? Our line is that we had, along with a senior practitioner, Jim Self, who will return in a few moments, almost live, as we look at a little video of Jim, came up with this idea that a research synthesis is the proper unit of knowledge transfer. It originally came from the evidence-based medicine movement of the 80s and 90s. That movement morphed into a broader evidence-based policy-making movement around the year 2000. And Denise Rousseau and Jeff Pfeiffer in management began to bring it into the management discourse when they were asking the question, are we teaching in our MBA classroom evidence-based management ideas? And indeed, there's a nice little center set up in the Netherlands that has a treasure trove of information called the Center for Evidence-Based Management that does an absolutely wonderful job of explaining how one instantiates or puts into practice this idea. So what is a research synthesis? I've said the term so many times now that you probably haven't noticed I didn't define it, but let's get to the definition now. A systematic review of all pertinent evidence, not just the evidence that supports a particular position, a critical analysis of the quality of the evidence, a synthesis of the evidence, a balancing of benefits and harm, an assessment of the feasibility and practicality, and a clear statement of a recommendation and a detailed rationale. Why each of these phrases is important. All pertinent evidence. Often when we think of a literature review, it is highly biased towards whatever literature will support the hypothesis that the researcher wants to investigate in that particular project. Even if it's not conscious, at the subconscious level, researchers in the positivist tradition will tend to cite literature that supports their hypothesis, not that contradicts it. And so the first thing is all pertinent evidence, a critical analysis of the quality of the evidence. Not all research is created equal. And I'm not talking about the disputes between different paradigms of accounting research. I'm talking about within an individual paradigm, you can have some very high quality work done, and you can have research that is done that has taken a lot of shortcuts. And so there has to be a critical analysis of the quality of it. There has to be some assessment of feasibility, so on and so forth. So this is the tool that we're looking at, a research synthesis. The idea of a research synthesis comes with a particular process. So it seems like I like process models. And so here we were with a second process model going through the stages that one would actually do, including the defining of the focal question and a joint understanding of that question between practitioners and those that are carrying out the research. All of this is done before one begins searching for the paper, for the papers that underlie them. The basic idea of research syntheses has been synthesized into what's called the information seeking and communication model. It has nothing to do with this particular paper, other than it's a shameless plug to go read our other paper, the second paper in our series, where we talk about the model and how it can be used to evaluate the various ad hoc means that have been used in knowledge transfer. So we used off-the-shelf software, in what you might say. We brought in the guideline for rapid evidence assessment. Rapid evidence assessment is good in that it's targeted on quickly creating solid research syntheses. And one of the things that we kept hearing from standard setters is it takes years to get answers from academics if we go and consult them about a problem. They want to do new research, and the entire project will take a couple of years. And even then, we only get one data point out of it. And that's because our world is highly focused on the individual journal article. And so when a standard setter approaches us, we think in terms of producing a journal article, because that is our typical unit of production. But it's not going to be the unit of production that is most effective for the standard setters. So then we assembled some users. And our users were 4 different folks. Originally, we thought we were going to have to anonymize them. And they insisted on anonymity until the project ended. And then they said, we want to be associated with this as change leaders. And so you'll actually see them turning up in the video that I'm going to run in just a second that gives you excerpts from the actual simulation. And so we took 2 steps of the IAASB standard setting process, and we then simulated them using these actual standard setters. It started, and we did this within a time period that was critical. Standard setters told us as we interviewed them that the time between their board meetings is the critical amount of time that they would like to have answers to their questions. So in other words, you got 12 to 14 weeks between board meetings. And so that's why we brought in the idea of the rapid evidence assessment. And we actually carried out this live during a normal school term when the researchers were teaching, the doctoral student was preparing for her comprehensive exam. We did not drop everything to work on this for 4 months. But in that 4 months, we worked with the standard setting committee to define the question. We then met with them to present the draft synthesis. And then in the month afterwards, in May, we did the debriefing to collect further. We taped, or I don't know how you call this, we taped the Zoom meeting just like Mohammed is doing right now with doing this Zoom meeting. Now, this is where it gets touch and go. Bear with me for a second. Let's see if we can actually bring up some excerpts from the actual synthesis itself. And this is where we need a little bit of luck with the technology. And so we shall see what we shall see.
In recent years, policymakers and academics have witnessed the vast amount of accounting and auditing research that is relevant and useful to policymaking decisions. They have recognized the challenges of transferring the knowledge from this research to policymakers. And
I'm just going to pause it here for a second to make sure that folks are actually seeing the video. Can somebody give me a yes or a no? Were you seeing and hearing the video?
We can hear it.
Yes, you were. Excellent. Thank you muchly. Now we'll go directly to the part of the video which deals with the simulation itself, which starts at around minute 4 of the video. And here we go.
the role of producing the research synthesis. We worked with a former standard setter who had served as the executive director of the International Federation of Accountants and the technical director of the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. He took on the role of professional facilitator and helped us assemble a standard setters subcommittee. They took on the role of liaison between academics and standard setters. Each of these former standard setters had experience in developing the standard that we used in our simulation, the group audit standard. Next, we'll give you a glimpse of the simulation.
We are all driven by our own experiences and biases, and as audit partners, we remember the mistake we missed in our first year as an audit partner or our last year as an audit manager, and we got away with it. We learned from it, but in every audit after that, we tend to focus on making sure that problem never happens again. And we've all been there, I think, and we all live by that model. I think the auditing standards setters question, Steve, is always, is it possible to parallel this discussion to the medical profession, which is the one that I spent the first year looking at? Is it possible to equate what happens in that environment with what happens in this environment? And I think that that's an open question, and I don't think we know the answer until you list the results of your research in 8 or 12 weeks' time.
What do standard setters think
Sound
about
is clear, but the slide not clear there, Prof.
Desirable.
Somebody said something there, and I'm not sure what they said.
The sound is clear, but the slide not clear.
The video is not going through. What a pity. Okay, it was an honest try to do it, but it gave you at least a little sense of what it is that you heard from Jim. And let me just give you one other little bit of voiceover only, as Mohammed says, we're not getting the video. I would just want to get you a couple of live quotes from, yeah, thank you, Ricardo. So we will continue on with the presentation. So we're going to stop the share, and we'll give you the YouTube correct. Yes, indeed, Ms. Chen, that is correct. We are on YouTube on both the Queen's channel and in the beautiful part of the world. So anyhow, we're getting back to the slide. I'm hoping that we're there now, and let us see if we can move on. So the standard setters were not chosen to be folks that would be yes people. Indeed, the research team had nothing to do with choosing the standard setters. We left that up to Jim. And coming into the research project, as you can see by the selection of quotes on this screen, they were less than enthusiastic. They were basically saying, okay, we're going to go along with this, but we're not all that certain that they're going to be able to do anything. Standard Setter 3, that we were a bit skeptical of the ability to produce quality information in a short period of time. So as you can see going in, we did not exactly have a bunch of cheerleaders working with us, and that would be expected given these folks were pretty hard-nosed international standard setters from South Africa and the United States. So that's the process. It took us a little while. This is, we're going to do all this through the video, but it doesn't really matter. What you need to know is that after 12 weeks, we did a research synthesis that followed all the prescriptions of the Center for Evidence-Based Management in how to carry out a research synthesis, and we presented it to the standard setters. And at this point in time, their attitude changed quite a bit. Two types of evaluation that we did. And this, once again, is in accordance with the precepts of design science. Were you able to do it well? It's the instantiation assessment. And then was what you produced useful? So we did this in a context. We didn't drop everything. We then spent lots of time with the standard setters at the beginning. And by lots of time, I mean 2 hours with them to make sure that we understood what the standard setter was saying when they raised the question. And this then led us to appreciate what the information the standard setters were looking for, while at the same time reaching out to the standard setters and saying, this is what we can deliver. And so part of the process of this project is for the two sides to have a real understanding about what each other's expectations is and not to attempt to overpromise. And so we told them we'd be looking at the direct on-point literature, of which there was very little in 2004 about group audit. But we're also going to take a broader look at the audit research for appropriate analogies. And we're going to scope it out from taking a look at the basic social science research. So in other words, we were saying we're going to look at a complete package of how the research literature can inform you about this issue of sole versus divided responsibility. There was a little bit of pushback, but that was fine. We knew that was going to occur and we built that in. We carried out a wide ranging search using ABI Info, which is a database of scholarly publications, business source, econlet, and we even went to the Social Science Research Network, SSRN, to actually look for relevant articles. Pre-December 31st, 2003, as you can see, there is very little research. And so when we constructed the synthesis, we did it first from the point of view of what was known at the time the board made its decision. And then they insisted they wanted to see what happened with academic research after that time. And so we did a second extension. But what we're evaluating, and I want to make this perfectly clear, what we're evaluating is the synthesis report that we gave them based on what was available in 2003 when they made that decision that set the standard setting process back 18 months. When we went into the broader academic literature looking for analogies, as you can see, the number of articles increases substantially. And that indeed is what leveraged a lot of our recommendations and conclusions. So in terms of, could we do it? It's doable. The process as laid out was workable. We were right about the fact that the standard setters were entirely necessary to understand what the real question is. And third, we'd never done one of these before. We were novices at it. And the guidance that exists out there in the Center for Evidence-Based Management was very easy to implement. So then comes the question is, did we create anything useful? And that's known in design science as pragmatic validity. And once again, this is where we see the fact that the folks that are involved in the project as the users are the only ones who are really able to assess the quality of the outcome, because they're the ones that know what they were actually looking for, what was the evidence that they wanted to hear, and does that evidence make any difference in their decision? Proof of concept. Seems I could see the academic world being kind of objective, fact-sensing, synthesizing group that doesn't have an axe to grind. That might be a little too generous to us, but nonetheless, that is often how folks see academic intervention in other disciplines. Timely. They were very surprised that we actually were able to do it in the 12 weeks. That was a huge shock. The iterative communication, and indeed these standard setters who are very busy people suggested that we needed an additional interim checkpoint in addition to the two that we already designed into the process. So, and this was their idea, not the researchers. The usefulness of the report's content. It did come out with a very clear statement that under sole responsibility model, there was a whole amount of work you did, procedures followed, and that it could make a difference in audit quality. In other words, the basics of the research says it's not just a question of what ends up in the auditor's report. It is the fact that when you report something in the auditor's report, it has an expectation you're doing a lot of work. They found that we were on the whole able to communicate clearly. They asked a lot of questions to ensure we were not cherry picking from the research. They did say, hey guys, you missed the idea of a plain language executive summary. Oops, these things happen. And as Standard Setter 1 says, I can't say the decisions would be better, but I can say the decisions would have had more information behind them. They might still make a bad decision, but they make the decisions with more knowledge to make the decision. Standard Setter 3 said it made me think a little more about how the words in the standards really need to drive the behavior that we expect from both parties. And indeed, they were so enthused about this, in addition to volunteering themselves to appear live on video, they immediately, without prompting by us, started generating a list of topics that they thought would be important to have this approach applied to on the current standard setting agenda. So the quality assessment, and I'm near the end of my presentation, so if you're going to ask questions, begin to think of them now, because we're down to the last few slides in the presentation. In the quality assessment, we did it. And they asked for no more contact with the researchers because they didn't think it was an excessive time commitment. They found the synthesis to be usable. They felt it would have affected their decision making at the time, and these three standard setters were all on the standard setting board in that time period. And indeed, they thought that the approach of carrying out research synthesis had lots of topics that it could be applied to and begin to list them. And they felt that it provided them with a sense of comfort, that maybe there was something to be gained by discussing matters more with academics, and that it wouldn't take 2 or 3 years to actually get an academic to answer the question. So our conclusion, as we validated the usefulness in one particular problem, we achieved the first requirement of design science by providing a proof of concept for the research synthesis approach. But the next step would be to do multiple instantiations of these, and it would be helpful if the regulators would let us do this sort of approach, or others in academia do this sort of approach in real time with an actual standard being set. That was our original hope. We did have an IAASB committee that was interested in actually being a guinea pig, but for those of you who follow international auditing standards, you know that there was this monitoring group that was lurking in the background in this period, and the chair of the IAASB did not really want to have us being involved in things at the same time they were being evaluated by the monitoring
Dear
group.
Professor,
And so that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing, and it's up for questions.
question from Bolzer, you can ask.
Hello, my name is Tobias Polzer. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. So thank you very much for this insightful presentation. My question would be how to take this further, kind of how to institutionalize this idea of knowledge creation. And I'm frankly a bit puzzled how things work in the private sector. Very briefly, my research is on public sector accounting. And I know, for example, that the IPSAS board, so the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, they have a yearly forum, IPSAS Research Forum, where they kind of do exactly or try to institutionalize what you are doing, like bringing academics and the board together. So what would be the next steps? What would you say?
Well, COVID set us back a little bit. We had a communications plan, including some very professional videos that you can see on Chris's video site, and I'll give you the reference for that in a second, to try to convince standard setters that there was a new paradigm out there for them to consider how to use. We communicated with the chair of the Public Oversight Board of the IAASB. We communicated with the chair of the IAASB, and both were interested. Both are overwhelmed with the COVID crisis. So unfortunately, we haven't had as much traction as we hope to have, but how to proceed with this, it does require institutional support and development. I was suggesting to the folks at CIMA that they would be excellent hosts for a management accounting approach to this. And I suggested to the IAASB that the IFAC could actually be the home of a institutionalized support for the creation of research syntheses. This is very similar to what is done in the social sciences. There's a group called the Campbell Collaborative that authorizes well thought out research synthesis across a variety of areas. And of course, the granddaddy of them all is the Cochrane Collaborative in medicine that advocates the same sort of thing here. So right now we're searching for a home to help institutionalize this. And that process has been set back a little bit at this point in time, but we have hopes that when we get to sometime in 2022 and COVID is behind us, that we may be able to get some movement forward on this issue, because there certainly is some interest in this approach.
Thank you. Yeah.
Professor Mahmoud Naghi. Professor Mahmoud Naghi, you have a question? Professor Mahmoud Naghi from Mansoura University. Open your mic.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Professor Stephen, for your presentation. I'd like to say, to improve the relationship between academics and the practice, we need, firstly, a conceptual framework for auditing standards. Secondly, a model for valuation, the control value and the predictive value of independent report information. What about your opinion?
I have to say, after watching the FASB and the International Accounting Standards Board struggle for 40 years, almost my entire professional career, to create a conceptual framework for financial accounting, it is not clear to me that that is necessarily a high priority issue. Luckily, Christine Bonosan has signed off now, so I can take a shot at FASB. The FASB has put an enormous amount of work into this and created a language that only they use, and only they and people who seek to influence them use. And so it is not clear to me that this really does anything for us overall, by coming up with conceptual frameworks. So what I heard your question was, is saying we needed to come up with a conceptual framework for auditing. I think that it's useful for academics to think about that. I really don't think that it is that big of a priority for standard setters. When I look at a conceptual framework for auditing, I go back to Mohsen Sharif, a nice person from Egypt, I understand, monograph in 1960 that really said a lot about it. And we can go back to some of the Dutch monographs in the late 40s, early 50s. So my belief is that it's the duty of academics to write about conceptual framework. I'm not so sure it's the duty of the standard setters to do so.
About the model of evaluate predictive value and control value of independent report information.
Okay. It's a point of view. I accept that.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Hussein Auda, you have a question?
Hassan Auda, yes, I have
Hassan Auda?
questions.
Yes.
I would like to thank you, Professor, for your constructive presentation. But I think that the international journals are the main reason for the gap between the academics and the practice. Because the international journal has some criteria in order to publish the paper. For example, the accounting review, we are one of the reviewer. It's mainly based on statistics and mathematical data. And if the research does not have statistical mathematical data, is not published. And when we have interviewed the practitioner they don't understand this type of data. They need some easy information or easy research that can be applied into practice. So I see the international journal, the criteria for publication is one of the main reasons to have the gap between the practice and the research. That is number one. Second, in CIGAR, I'm coming from public sector accounting field. We have created practice relevant research agenda, where we can try to solve the problem of the gap between the practice and the research. We have created co-creation and the co-design approach. When we are going to design the standard or to set the standard for the public sector accounting, we need to involve the academics, the researcher, the practitioner, the user, and the professional standard setter together. Then we can solve this gap. So what do you think about the role of the international public journals concerning this gap between the practice and the academics?
Well, Professor Hassam, I don't think you were listening very carefully to my presentation. The fundamental first point that I made is that we have to separate the unit of production from the unit of consumption when we are thinking about influencing practice. Influencing practice, we start with the academic production of journal articles. Journal articles are, I've worked across a series of international journals from accounting organizations and society. I'm a past editor-in-chief at Contemporary Accounting Research. I'm a current editor at the Accounting Review. And my viewpoint on all of this is that the accounting journals have become increasingly open over the course of my career to a diverse set of research. But that has nothing to do with the issue that I'm talking about today. What I'm saying is that the focus on the individual article as the means of knowledge transmission to practice is fundamentally flawed. And that the answer to the second part of your question about using language that is understandable by practitioners comes not in the individual article, but through the research synthesis that has to be written in an understandable manner to practitioners. recognizing that the researchers and the practitioners need to dialogue with each other in order to develop a common language. We shouldn't expect the practitioners to adopt our language, but at the same time, the practitioners shouldn't expect us to speak to them only in their language. There has to be work on both sides, and there's a lot of goodwill out there that if we can find a means of institutionalizing this process, I believe that much can be achieved. That's it. Next up. Mohammed?
Yes. Are there another question? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic.
There's a couple here in the chat.
Yeah, Ricardo.
That Ricardo says, and this is Ricardo has a great question here in the chat. I don't know if he wants to speak to it or just let me answer it in chat form.
Yes, the questions are over there. Yes, so as you see, my questions, mainly my research is on management accounting and performance evaluation systems.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the questions. Should universities and governments change the incentives for academics to engage in policy-making research? Because I think that so far this has not been done. How difficult would be that to change the current status quo? We have to convince a number of people that we should change the incentives. And finally, what would be the adequate performance measurement system for academics in an ideal world?
I don't think we have to go that far. What we documented in the paper, the second paper of my 3 papers, is the fact that over 150 audit academics volunteered to take part in the research synthesis projects co-sponsored by the PCAOB and the audit section. And some of them volunteered for multiple different syntheses. There was no change in their incentives. There was no institutional changes. And we went out and we interviewed these authors. And there's at least in the audit world, we found that there was a great interest in transferring the accumulated audit knowledge to researchers. So perhaps at some stage, issues about incentives, but I think the intrinsic motivation, to speak in a little bit of your language, I am a management accounting researcher and 1 day out of 7. The intrinsic motivation is there in the academic community, as was seen by the large number of auditing scholars. And it was very interesting. If you go down the list of those who took part in the research synthesis project on a voluntary basis, it goes from the very top international scholars down to recently minute PhDs who wanted to show that they knew something from their PhD program. So I'm not so sure that that in the short term, there's a big problem with incentives given the intrinsic motivation. I think that in the longer term, you're right, Ricardo, in that we do need the institutionalization. And that is where the conversation I had with Tobias goes to, which is what do we need to do in order to institutionalize this?
Thank you. Are there another, Mudar, Professor Mudar from Jordan, you can ask. Open your mic, dear Professor Mudar. Your mic is mute. Your mic is mute, dear Prof. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Stephen, for your presentation. Very interesting. Just want to put a comment coming from a developing country. Actually, most of the people here attending are from that. One of the most difficult, I mean, sort of, you know, recommendations we could put as researchers from developing countries is to make a comment in, I mean, when you are publishing in some high quality journal, let's say from Emerald, Wiley, or whatsoever publishers, you know, is to go and criticize or, you know, a standard. The general practice is that the journals are pushing us to criticize our own environments rather than criticizing the standard itself. And this makes, I mean, input from a project like yours from developing countries and, you know, and their contexts much less useful. I mean, I recently published a paper in the International Journal of Auditing, in which one person asked me, what was your best, I mean, why do you think this paper is special? You know what I replied? I said, because I was able to criticize an international standard of auditing in such a paper, in such, you know, a journal, which is a high quality journal, because that was the thing I really wanted to say. And I was given the chance after, you know, a big confrontation with the, say, reviewers or whatever. In most journals, we could say that, you know, comment on our results and say, well, because of the environment and our countries. But actually being able to say that, well, because this standard in particular is, you know, not I mean, it could be changed or something based on this evidence. This is very difficult. I just wanted to, I mean, I just wanted to make this comment because, and it might be much useful if we were given more chances to say something about the standards when it is defended. Okay, well defended, of course, rather than just, you know, going into the comment, well, because our contexts are deficient and so and so. That's it, just a comment.
Yeah, Madar, that is a very apt comment. As a Canadian, I have similar problems in convincing the American-based journals that work using Canadian data is to be valued. My friends in Singapore, once again, we're not talking about less developed countries here, I recognize, but I want to point out that this is an American problem. In that there's a strong sense among Americans and often American trained academics that if it's not done on US data, it's not important to anybody. And this has been one of the touchstones of my career as an editor. Some 15 years ago, I called out the Accounting Review, JAR, and JAE on the fact that they rarely, if ever, published papers by author teams that did not involve somebody in the United States. But their editorial board were dominated by American-based academics or Americans that were hidden abroad in places like the London Business School. And we've come a long way. We've come a long way since 15 years ago. Is it perfect? No. Part of the thing that we have to do, those of us outside the United States, and I think you just described exactly how you have to frame the conversation, is to show why your data illustrate a bigger problem and that your country data provides you with an ability to address the problem in a way that US-based data can't actually do. And it sounds to me from what you briefly described about your research is that you've actually iterated to that position that you actually saw. And this is what I teach when I teach doctoral seminars around the world, is I teach about the fact that you have to figure out how to get inside the American mentality of it's not done in my backyard, is not important. The other great thing is that increasingly there are a lot of respected journals, and including the one you just cited, the International Journal of Auditing, that are not dominated by Americans and American reviewers, and hence you get a much better chance to express your viewpoint. And indeed, one of the reasons that I believe I'm an editor at the Accounting Review is because of my statement along this line. And the fact that even though I'm Canadian, they know that I am going to take a look at research from diverse backgrounds in a different way. And I'm going to ensure that the reviewers that I pick are not going to be the sort that are going to dismiss research simply because it's done in another country. And I think that's part of what Robert Nichols charged to all of his reviewers are. Robert is by far the broadest editor. He's had academic appointments in Europe, New Zealand, Australia, obviously not in the less developed world, but he certainly had a broader perspective. And I think a lot of what you were describing, Madar, is the issue of not so much devaluing less developed countries' data, but devaluing data from anywhere but the United States.
Thank you.
Peter, yeah, you can ask.
Yeah. Hello, Stephen. I just have a quick question. My research is also related to auditing setting standards, but in the developing countries context. So, as you know, it's ISB issues the standards, and then it comes down to that the developing countries are just basically, they don't have a, let's say, a seat on the table, but rather that they just take the standards and they translate it somehow. So you mentioned something about the ISB being very transparent, and I know that they created a task called the Developing Nation Permanent Task Force, and this was supposed to given the developing nations a say when the standards are in process, like issued. Do you have any information about how is that, what is the actual weight of this task force? If they are, if they release a document on saying their agenda, or how much they were involved or not involved in the recent standards? I'm not sure.
I'm afraid I don't have that level of institutional knowledge about the IAASB. I know in my interviews with various IAASB board members over the years that they are conscious of this as an issue. However, it's not clear whether this approach that you're describing has actually proved to be effective. But I do know that this is something that is very much on their mind, but I'm not in deep enough with the IAASB to be able to say whether this particular initiative that they have is effective or not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Are there another questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
I might have a question. It's hi, Dr. Stephen. Thank you for your presentation. So I'm Mona Azgi. I'm an associate professor at HEC Montreal. So I do mostly critical research. So this will explain maybe my comment. So I know that we are far from being there, but aren't you thinking that maybe engaging in policy-making research and getting closer to standard setter might have like some long-term risk for academic research in terms of losing its independency or becoming a pressure tool like any other, competing with the financial world, with other political interest? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, thank you very much, Mona. It's nice to speak with you via Egypt, and you're only 300 kilometers away from me. But on a good day, I've been a critical perspective sort of person. I read the journal Critical Perspectives in Accounting. My good friend Yves Gendron is the senior editor there. The interesting balance that you describe of being distant yet close, and that dynamic, I think, is resolved at the individual researcher level. In other words, there will always be those who pursue the critical project and have distance from research, from the standard setters and other parts of the establishment. But what I am talking about today is reducing the irrelevance, the other I. So there's independence and there's irrelevance or non-relevant. And I'm much more concerned at this stage in my career with the fact that academic research that has been generated is not being communicated. And so if I had to make a choice today of independence versus being not relevant, then I am going to come down on let's get a little bit more relevant. If we were already well in the way of doing knowledge transfer and having the sorts of effects that I would like to see us have, then I would have a lot more worry about your position because I share it in principle. I just don't think that it is the fundamental problem that we're really facing at this stage of the game.
Yeah, clearly it's too soon to speak about independence when relevance is not. We are not there yet. Clearly.
Yeah, then that's my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand your point. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Charles Chu, you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Steve. Good to see you. I'm even closer. I'm even closer to you. Muna is in Montreal and I'm in Toronto, so I think we need Egypt to put us together. I missed the first part of the presentation because I had another meeting. Sorry, but I knew about your paper. I have one comment and one question, non-related. One comment I want to make is I heard your comment about congratulations, by the way, on becoming editor of the Accounting Review. And just to put a bit of I don't know, my observation I had with the editorial board, the composition of the editors of Accounting Review, but especially at CAR, our Canadian journal. The other day with Bertrand, we were in a meeting and we counted the number of editors, not editorial board members, editors of CAR, and there were about 25 of them, and about 20 are from the States. And there are 2 or 3 from University of Toronto, which, no offense, it's almost the States in accounting-wise. So I just want to make a comment, like for a Canadian Accounting Association journal, to have about 80 to 90% of editors are from the States, and we know what kind of research that they are generally focusing on, is quite problematic. So for you to go out on the other side and do Accounting Review as a Canadian, I think it's quite an accomplishment, and kudos for that. So small comment. I don't know if you want to respond to that. My other question is more directly related to the debate of academic research and the practice and the fluidity of the knowledge or transfer of the knowledge. I don't know if you have seen going around quite viral a couple of weeks ago, the IFRS Foundation 2-3 weeks ago has issued a consultation paper on sustainability reporting standards, a document that is basically sort of reinventing the wheel. This has been going on for a long time. Obviously, it's my area and I take it at heart. And the paper has absolutely zero reference of independent peer review academic research, which has been conducted for the last 40 plus years, right? And so in response to that, you may have also seen the response that myself and other signatories, initiated by Carol Adams, have been going on to challenge the assertions and the decisions and the things that they were going to make without consulting the academics. And my question to you, how do you deal in a situation where there's such a big topic, such as sustainability reporting? Today, we know all the crisis that's going on. And a body like the IFRS Foundation ignoring research, period. Like just, you look at the end of the document and they go, we have consulted research from XYZ and there is 0 academic. So I don't know how we deal with the situation. It's quite irritating, to stay polite. And I thought it was sort of related because it's also sort of standard setting related in the non-financial arena. So sorry for this long question, but I had to, it was my rant of the Friday morning. So sorry about that.
Excellent observations. I've been quite intrigued with the approach taken by the sustainability community. I think that a part of your response was that you went for too narrow of a group of researchers. There are a lot of strong positivist researchers out there that would have gladly joined into your response, yet the response of the group was highly concentrated in one research community. And so I think that that a little bit more coalition building across academia might have meant that would be more successful, because we have 2 very good academics on the IASB that are both very open to research, in Tom Scott, who's a Canadian, and Anne, and I cannot necessarily pronounce her last name right, Tarkissis from Australia. And both would be aghast at what you have pointed out if it was conveyed to them in a way that they could action it. And it showed that it reflected more than just a certain subset of academia, because there's a lot of us. As a matter of fact, I'm engaged in my first archival agency theory-based examination of CSR right now. First time in my career with somebody like Gord Richardson. And I am certain that Gord would have been one of the characters, even if he is at the University of Toronto, that would have been sympathetic to the type of response that that you folks put together. And it was a very well put together response, except when I looked at the list of signers, was it didn't really reach out across the academic community. So my response to that is we definitely have an in at the IASB now, that putting together a group of academics that we're going to give input to Tom and Anne would definitely lead to some action being taken. I certainly expect that I have attended only one IASB type of event, and yes, it's a little too dominated by the positivists of a certain ilk, but nonetheless, there is an openness there. And Tom in particular has worked with Norman McIntosh during his career. And so Tom has a much broader view of the world than the typical archival empirical researcher has. So yes, I was too concerned about the narrowness of what they called their research-based release paper, where they claimed to consult research and virtually ignored everything that's been done in the last 40 years in academic research. And I totally agree with the statement that your group put together. And I would have signed it if I'd been asked, but I wasn't asked either.
Well, you, okay.
So it's a question of now considering what are the levers that can be used. And I believe that that this is an especially good time for such an initiative to be undertaken in response to something as ridiculous as the report that the IFRS Foundation put out.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Just to clarify, within the academia, sadly, so there is also a divide on this view. There are actually the definitions, for example, I'm going to give an example of impact and materiality that we discuss in our academic community. You have accounting academics who have a different view and perceptions. The financial accounting, academics, and also the critical social academics, and people like you who are behavioral, who are probably somewhere in between, or who are sympathetic to both. And that may be why, I don't know, Carol had invited a certain number of people, didn't want to have the list too big, representing editors of journals who have published this kind of research, and some senior scholars from different countries. Now I got to tell you that the letter has triggered attention of the IFRS, because the chairman of the IFRS Foundation called one of us on the phone, and then the EAA has also established a symposium just now today at the end of the month to get together. But I'm talking about ex ante, when the IFRS document came out. I'm not talking about after. Why didn't they focus on the academic research, and now they're reacting to all those controversial reactions that we're having, right? So.
And then that's where my response to one of the earlier questions is so concerning, which is the need to institutionalize routine and effective knowledge transfer. And what you're essentially doing is giving me another example where the routine transfer did not take place. And it is because we haven't built the awareness and the mechanisms for such a transfer mechanism to take place. Even at the IFRS, IASB level, at the IASB level, I know they are much focused on this issue of how to bring in academic knowledge. I don't know about the foundation, which is a different beastie that's at arm's length from the board. So perhaps they haven't got the same religion as the board has with respect to the involvement of academic synthesis into their development project. But it all boils down to, in my mind, convincing folks that academics can respond on a timely basis to issues like this. And in fact, your response was very good in that it was very timely. And I think that was the wonderful thing about it. It's the only thing that I regret is that you don't have a synthesis of that research to immediately send off to the board, because we don't have those institutions that, the idea of the Cochrane Collaborative and the Campbell Collaborative is you create these things before the demand is there for them, so that they actually can be used at the right time. And so that's part of what I'm working on, and that's this case is just another example of the work we have to do.
Thank you, Steve.
Professor Mara Cameron from Italy. Have a question? Yes.
Yes, thank you. I am Mara Cameron from Bocconi University, Italy. I would like only to add some from the experience of European Accounting Association, because for some years I was a representative in one of the International Accounting Standard Board, setting board, the one for education from European Accounting Association. And at that time, it is only a volunteer basis engagement, in the sense that the International Accounting Standard Board asks for volunteer from academics, and European Accounting Association decide to send me in that case. But after that experience, European Accounting Association decides to have some, if you want, board that are made of a bunch of academics, not only one representative. And that kind of boards on regular basis works together with, for example, the different standard setting, and try to take a long-term relation in order to have some kind of exchange of opinion, works, and whatever. So one of the possible solution to set a long-term relation is a decision from the academics organization, in that case the European Accounting Association, to set a board that are devoted to develop a relation with the standard setter, basically.
Good idea. We've analyzed that as a possibility in our second paper, and we've shown that there, while with appropriate retasking, such things can be effective. They are not in and of themselves the solution to the problem. And so if you'd like to hear our views further on that, we have a paper that's on SSRN that's in third round review at a major accounting journal that actually evaluates what needs to be done with respect to that approach in order to actually make it more evidence informed and to carry out knowledge transfer more effectively. But you are right, Maura, in identifying this as a means, but it needs to have considerable more oomph put into it in order to be effective. Mohammed, I'm getting tired and I have a 1 o'clock our time.
Yes, thank you very much, dear Prof. Stephen, for your contributions and your effort. I think that you have done very well, answering with a lot of questions there, dear Professor Stephen. So thank you very much. Indeed, to all that remains for me to say is thank you everyone that's joined us, and I thank you very much for taking the time out to present to us today, dear Professor Stephen. It's been really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here. I enjoyed the questions, and I enjoyed meeting a lot of folks from parts of the world that I have not met yet, but I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you very much, Mohammed. Valuable service.
Thank you.
I hope to see you soon in Egypt.
Yeah, thank you, bro.
Thank you. Bye.